7 months, $87,000. One dead lake that stank of sewage and broken dreams. I dragged it back to life for Sarah. 22 acres of glass, fish flashing silver, cedar dock still bleeding sap. Every sunrise, I drank coffee from her chipped blue mug and whispered, "We made it, babe." Then the gravel screamed. Black Escalade, red soles, sunglasses that cost more than my first truck. She stepped out, clutching a clipboard like a death warrant. Willowbrook Estates HOA has owned this lake since 1987. Pack up your little memorial. It's community property now. I had the deed in my pocket. Surveys, permits stamped in triplicate. Didn't matter. She smiled the way only people who've never lost anything can smile. I built this water with my bare hands and her ghost in my head. Now they want to slap a no trespassing sign on her grave. What would you do if they came for the only piece of her you had left? Drop your HOA horror story below. I'm not the only one who's about to burn a neighborhood down. My name's Dale Hutchinson, 62, retired aerospace engineer, widower, and apparently public enemy #1 in suburbia's war on happiness. Sarah and I spent 38 years dreaming about waterfront property. Every weekend driving country roads, her lavender perfume mixing with diner coffee while she sketched fishing docks on paper napkins. "Dale, imagine what we could do with that," she'd say, pointing at some scummy pond, the scratch of her pen on rough paper, planning our someday. Lung cancer took her in 18 months. I held her hand in that antiseptic hospital room, promising I'd build our lake. The beep of machines counting down her heartbeats while I whispered lies about how we'd fish together next summer. Life insurance, $200,000. My 401k, $150,000. Most guys my age buy Florida condos. I bought 22 acres of abandoned quarry that smelled like sewage and dead dreams, what county records politely called wetland restoration opportunity. Previous owner was a hermit named Ezra Thornton, who'd lived in a rusted trailer, surrounded by shotgun shells and paranoia. When he died, the property moldered in probate for 2 years. My kids thought I'd cracked. "Dad's having a breakdown with bulldozers," my son Marcus said, but I could hear Sarah's voice in the morning mist. "See what it could be, honey." 7 months of back-breaking work transformed stagnant poison into paradise. The acrid smell of rotting vegetation replaced by fresh cedar and clean water. Native bass jumping at sunrise, osprey nesting in platforms I'd built by hand. Every morning, coffee from her chipped blue mug while I told her ghost about our progress. Then Tuesday happened. I was waist-deep in lake muck, adjusting the aerator intake, when gravel crunched behind me like breaking bones. Black Escalade. Designer heels clicked across my access road. Tick, 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 like a bomb timer. Out stepped perfection in a power suit. Blonde hair that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security. Makeup that could survive artillery fire. And a smile sharp enough to gut fish. "Mr. Hutchinson?" Voice like honey over razor blades. Bethany Cromwell, Willowbrook Estates HOA president. She held out a business card between manicured talons, careful not to let her fingers touch my work-stained hands. I wiped mud on my Carhartt, which made her nose wrinkle like I'd opened a septic tank. "What can I do you for, ma'am?" "There's been a misunderstanding about your project." She gestured at my lake like it was a meth lab. "This entire water feature has been designated community recreational space since 1987. You're operating on HOA property." She spread documents across my truck hood like a Vegas dealer, expensive paper that whispered money and lawyers. Her eyes never left mine, calculating, measuring, finding me wanting. "I own this land," I said, pulling out my deed. "Fair and square." She barely glanced at it. "Oh, I'm sure you have paperwork. But property ownership is complicated when community interests are involved." The pause before complicated hung there like a threat, especially when someone of your background might not understand local regulations. My background? 25 years designing aircraft systems, but apparently my work clothes screamed, "Doesn't belong here." "What exactly are you suggesting, Mrs. Cromwell?" "Simply that this lake restoration, while I'm sure it's personally meaningful, disrupts our community's carefully planned aesthetic. Property values, you understand? Our residents invested in Willowbrook's exclusivity. Translation, your blue-collar memorial doesn't fit our country club vibe." "I'll need my lawyer to review these documents," I said. Her smile could have frozen July. "Of course. But I trust you'll voluntarily cease operations until this matter is properly resolved? For everyone's sake?" She climbed back into her Escalade, air conditioning hissing like a snake. Through tinted windows, I watched her make a phone call, probably reporting back to whoever sent her. I stood there holding her papers, the smell of diesel fumes mixing with lake water. watching my Sarah's dream get threatened by a woman who'd never built anything with her own hands. The war had started. I just didn't know the rules yet. 2 days later, I was back in the muck at 6 a.m., hydraulic excavator growling like a mechanical beast hungry for silt. The diesel exhaust mixed with morning fog, creating a haze that smelled like progress and Sarah's vindication. My contractor, Big Jim Rodriguez, had 20 years of quarry restoration under his belt. Steady hands that understood the difference between destruction and resurrection. The county truck appeared like a bad omen around 10 a.m. Dale Hutchinson? The inspector looked barely old enough to shave, clipboard clutched like a security blanket. Kevin Morrison, Environmental Compliance. We received an emergency report about unauthorized wetland destruction. I shut down the excavator, sudden silence making my ears ring. Through the quiet, I could hear Big Jim's sharp intake of breath. We both knew what this meant. "What kind of emergency?" I asked, climbing down from the cab. "Anonymous complaint about Environmental Protection Act violations. Heavy machinery operating without proper wetland permits." Morrison started snapping photos, his camera clicking like an agitated cricket in the morning stillness. Big Jim wiped grease from his hands with a rag that reeked of honest work. "Dale's got every permit known to mankind. Filed them 3 months back, approved 6 weeks ago. I'll need to verify documentation," Morrison said, scribbling notes. "But effective immediately, all excavation activities must cease pending review." That's when I spotted the black Escalade, positioned with tactical precision, where Bethany Cromwell could watch my world crumble from air-conditioned comfort. She wasn't even pretending to hide, just sitting there like a general watching artillery strikes. Something cold settled in my stomach. I pulled out my phone and zoomed in. Through her windshield, Bethany was animated on a phone call, gesturing toward my halted excavator. Her mouth moved in what looked like a victory speech. Then I remembered. My security cameras had caught headlights doing slow reconnaissance around my property at 11:23 p.m. last night. Same height as an Escalade, same arrogant pace. This wasn't a coincidence. This was warfare. But I'd spent 25 years in aerospace, where every system has backup systems. That afternoon, I drove to the county courthouse, my boots squeaking across marble floors that reeked of bureaucracy and crushed dreams. 3 hours in the records office, that musty cave where democracy goes to die, revealed Kevin Morrison's little secret. His home address, 1247 Willowbrook Court, Bethany's neighborhood, Bethany's HOA, Bethany's dues-paying constituency. Better yet, Morrison had married Janet Cromwell in 2019. Public records don't lie about family trees, and this one was rotten from the roots. Janet Cromwell Morrison, Bethany's baby sister. My aerospace training kicked in. When you find one system failure, you audit everything. Morrison's inspection history was a masterpiece of selective enforcement. 17 stop work orders issued in the past year, 16 overturned on appeal after costing property owners thousands in delays and legal fees. The 17th was mine, and it was bleeding me dry while lawyers argued procedural points. I'd read enough government manuals to know the rules. When officials have financial relationships with complainants, they're supposed to step aside. Back in my Air Force days, we called it conflict of interest. In civilian world, they call it Tuesday. Monday morning, I filed a formal ethics complaint, complete with family tree diagrams and Morrison's obvious bias. I also retained Rebecca Martinez, whose law office smelled like leather-bound justice and high-octane coffee. "Amateur hour corruption," she laughed, reviewing my documentation. "But effective amateur hour. Your inspector's not just in Bethany's pocket, he's family." Rebecca filed an emergency motion citing obvious conflict of interest. She also requested an independent state review, someone without Cromwell DNA contaminating their judgment. Wednesday brought sweet vindication. The ethics board suspended Morrison faster than a pilot ejecting from a burning cockpit. A replacement inspector, imported from 2 counties over, no family connections, reviewed my permits and pronounced them textbook perfect. Work could resume immediately. But Bethany wasn't surrendering. Thursday's newspaper featured a front-page hit piece, Lake Restoration or Environmental Disaster, complete with stage photos of muddy runoff during last week's thunderstorm and anonymous quotes about mosquito apocalypse. The article mentioned my military background but twisted it like a knife. 25 years designing aircraft navigation systems somehow qualified me to destroy ecosystems. They even weaponized Sarah's death, suggesting grief had clouded my environmental judgment. They were painting my love as lunacy. Friday evening, Big Jim called with news that made my blood freeze. Someone had sabotaged his excavator overnight. Sugar in the fuel tank, thousands in damage, work stopped again until repairs. I stood on my dock that night, Sarah's chipped mug warming my palms while loons called across dark water. The smell of cedar mixed with diesel fumes from the crippled excavator, a mechanical corpse bleeding hydraulic fluid onto gravel. 7 months of work, thousands of dollars, and Bethany was just warming up. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd shown me her playbook. Time to teach her what happens when engineers stop playing defense. Bethany's next attack came wrapped in civic duty and tied with a bow of bullshit. The flyer materialized in every mailbox Tuesday morning. Emergency neighborhood safety meeting. Protect our families from environmental terrorism. Professional layout, dramatic photos of industrial waste sites that looked nothing like my project, and language that made my Memorial Lake sound like Chernobyl with base boats. I arrived at Willowbrook Community Center early, parking my mud-splattered F-150 between vehicles that cost more than most people's houses. The air inside reeked of fresh carpet and artificial vanilla, that sickly sweet smell of money trying to mask its own rot. 40 residents filled folding chairs, clutching identical talking points like prayer books. Bethany owned that room like a televangelist owns Sunday morning, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who'd never been questioned by anyone without a mortgage payment to lose. Her PowerPoint presentation would have impressed Pentagon briefing rooms, slick graphics showing contaminated groundwater in Michigan, property value crashes in Oregon, and fish kills in Tennessee. This reckless excavation threatens everything we've built here, she declared, clicking to a slide showing dead catfish floating in some Midwestern creek. Unregulated dredging has destroyed communities from sea to shining sea. The local news crew captured every word while she distributed petition sheets demanding immediate project shutdown. Watching neighbors I'd helped with flat tires and snow removal sign away my Sarah's memorial felt like swallowing ground glass. But something about those signatures triggered my engineer brain. Pattern recognition from 25 years of spotting system failures. 3 signatures looked too perfect, too identical. Not just similar handwriting. Identical pressure, identical loops, identical microscopic tremors. After the meeting, I lingered in the parking lot where summer humidity carried the scent of fresh asphalt in suburban desperation. That's when Harold Cromwell's voice cut through evening air like a confession. "Thanks for signing, folks," he told the Johnsons from Maple Street. "Remember to mention the lawn discount when you call True Green tomorrow. Bethany worked out 15% off fertilizer packages for concerned residents." My blood turned to antifreeze. They weren't just organizing opposition, they were purchasing it. I followed my instincts home and checked my trail cameras. The footage from 11:30 p.m. revealed Harold creeping around my property line with surveyor stakes and a measuring tape, his whispered commentary crystal clear. "Move this one 6 feet. Give Kevin something concrete to cite. Make it look like boundary encroachment." The bastard was manufacturing evidence. My counterattack launched Saturday with Lake Restoration Open House. No professional marketing, just honest conversation about bringing Sarah's dream to life. The aroma of grilled burgers mixed with cedar shavings from my handmade dock as 60 neighbors toured actual restoration instead of Bethany's fear-mongering fiction. Jessica had driven up from environmental law school, bringing peer-reviewed studies on wetland economics. Dr. Patricia Weiss from the State Environmental Agency tested my water quality in real time, her equipment registering crystal-clear readings that made Bethany's contamination claims look like fantasy novels. "This is textbook habitat restoration," Dr. Weiss announced to the gathering crowd. "Mr. Hutchinson has transformed environmental liability into ecological treasure. Property values typically increase 15 to 20% around properly restored wetlands." That's when I played my trump card. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, connecting my laptop to the community center projector, "I want to show you what we're really fighting." The trail camera footage rolled in high-definition clarity. Harold Cromwell at 2:47 a.m., flashlight in hand, moving my survey markers 6 feet onto what would become Bethany's imaginary property claim. His voice carried perfectly in the summer night air. "Adjust the boundary. Make it look like encroachment. Kevin will cite this tomorrow." The silence was deafening. Then someone started clapping, slow at first, building to thunderous applause that echoed across my memorial waters. Channel 7's reporter practically tackled me for exclusive footage rights. By Sunday, my phone buzzed with support offers. The fishing club pledged weekend volunteers. Environmental groups offered technical assistance. 3 attorneys volunteered pro bono services for Harold's inevitable trespassing charges. But Monday morning brought Bethany's desperate escalation, a noise violation citation claiming I'd operated industrial machinery at 6:15 a.m., disturbing the peace with construction noise exceeding municipal limits. I'd been sitting on my dock at 6:15 a.m. with Sarah's coffee mug, watching sunrise paint the water gold while loons called across glass-smooth silence. The only sounds were my quiet words to her memory and fish jumping in water so clean you could see bottom at 20 feet. The citation included a sworn statement from multiple residents about excavator noise, complete with decibel measurements that would have required professional acoustic equipment to obtain. Professional equipment Bethany's sister Janet happened to own through her environmental consulting business. They'd stopped pretending this was about noise, environment, or community safety. This was personal warfare disguised as municipal code enforcement. Time to show them what happens when you declare war on a man with nothing left to lose except his wife's memory. Bethany's lawsuit arrived like a death sentence wrapped in legal letterhead, thick envelope that reeked of expensive paper and financial annihilation. Cromwell, Associates and Partners blazed across the top in gold embossing that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Emergency injunction: Hutchinson excavation causes catastrophic infrastructure damage. $127,000 in critical community systems destroyed. The complaint read like a Stephen King novel. My reckless earth-moving activities had allegedly severed underground fiber optic cables, damaged gas distribution lines, and compromised water mains serving the entire Willowbrook development. Their expert witness, Dr. Marcus Webb, claimed soil destabilization threatened imminent utility system failure affecting 47 family homes. Webb's credentials filled 2 pages: MIT graduate, 30 years environmental engineering, published author. His damage assessment included seismic analysis, soil compression studies, and computer modeling that looked like it belonged at NASA Mission Control. The temporary restraining order hearing was set for Friday at 2 p.m., Judge Patricia Manning presiding, whose Willowbrook Estates address I'd memorized after 5 minutes of public records research. But my aerospace training had taught me one golden rule. When someone claims catastrophic system failure, you verify every data point before believing the alarms. Wednesday morning, I called Nebraska 811, the utility location service that maps every buried line in the county. The technician who arrived smelled of honest sweat and diesel exhaust, his truck bristling with electromagnetic detection equipment that could find a buried nickel at 30 feet. "Let's see what's really down there," Tommy Morrison said, firing up his locator array. No relation to our suspended inspector, just a guy who'd spent 15 years preventing actual utility disasters. 3 hours of methodical scanning revealed the truth. Absolutely nothing. No fiber cables, no gas lines, no water mains within 300 feet of my excavation. The nearest HOA infrastructure was a storm drain that terminated 4 lots away, completely unaffected by work that had never approached their boundaries. "Whoever told you there's utilities here was smoking something stronger than tobacco," Tommy laughed, documenting empty ground with GPS precision. "I'd bet my house. There's nothing buried here except maybe some old dog bones." But Thursday afternoon brought the real bombshell. Rebecca Martinez had been digging into Webb's background with forensic accountant precision. Turns out MIT had never heard of Marcus Webb, and his 30 years' experience existed only in carefully fabricated resumes. The real Marcus Webb was a landscaper from Phoenix whose identity had been stolen for this elaborate fiction. The fake Webb's consulting contract, signed by Harold Cromwell as Emergency Infrastructure Coordinator, promised $35,000 for expert testimony about damage that existed only in Photoshop fantasies. Rebecca's private investigator had followed the money trail and discovered that Cromwell, Associates and Partners was a shell company created 6 days earlier. The Associates were Bethany's yoga instructor and her dog groomer. The Partners were Harold's fishing buddies who'd been promised free legal advice in exchange for lending their names to fake letterhead. They weren't just committing fraud. They were running an entire fake law firm. Friday's hearing felt like walking into a gladiator arena armed with truth and prayer. Judge Manning's courtroom reeked of lemon furniture polish and institutional justice, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry hornets. Bethany's legal team filled the plaintiff's table, 4 people in expensive suits who looked increasingly nervous as Rebecca arranged her evidence like ammunition. "Your Honor," the fake lead attorney began, his voice cracking slightly, "Mr. Hutchinson's reckless excavation has endangered critical infrastructure serving our entire community." He presented Webb's fabricated report with theatrical drama, complete with computer-generated diagrams showing utility systems that existed only in digital fantasy. The financial projections were equally impressive: $127,000 in emergency repairs for infrastructure that had never been installed. Then Rebecca stood up, and I swear the oxygen got sucked out of that room. Your Honor, I present the official county utility survey conducted by certified technician Tommy Morrison. She handed the clerk documentation still warm from the printer. This confirms 0 underground utilities within 500 feet of my client's property. Judge Manning's eyes widened as she reviewed Tommy's GPS-verified findings. But Rebecca was just warming up. Furthermore, the plaintiff's expert witness doesn't exist. Marcus Webb is a stolen identity. The real Webb is a landscaper in Arizona whose social security number was used to create fictional credentials. And Cromwell Associates and Partners was incorporated last Tuesday by yoga instructors and dog groomers. I watched Bethany's face transform from smug confidence to pure terror as her elaborate house of cards collapsed in real time. Your Honor, Rebecca concluded, this isn't civil litigation. It's organized fraud disguised as legal proceeding. We request immediate dismissal and criminal referral to the county prosecutor. Judge Manning's gavel crashed like thunder. Case dismissed with prejudice. Bailiff, please escort the plaintiff's table to the prosecutor's office for questioning. Walking out of that courthouse, I breathed summer air that tasted like victory and Sarah's approval. But watching Bethany led away in handcuffs, I realized cornered animals are most dangerous when they have nothing left to lose. The breakthrough came at 3:17 a.m. in the courthouse basement, surrounded by filing cabinets that reeked of mold and municipal secrets 35 years in the making. I'd been hunting paper trails since midnight, following breadcrumbs that started with Bethany's HOA incorporation and led me through decades of environmental records that bureaucrats had hoped would stay buried forever. My eyes burned from fluorescent glare. Coffee had gone cold hours ago, but something in the 1987 environmental impact study made me stop breathing. Quarry closure permit hash EIS 1987041 mandates complete restoration of original lake ecosystem within 10 years of permit issuance. Failure to comply shall result in property forfeiture to County Environmental Authority and immediate restoration at owner's expense. I read it again, then again. The implications hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. This wasn't just my property. This was a court-ordered restoration that had been legally required since Reagan was president. Ezra Thornton hadn't just owned swampland. He'd inherited a mandate to resurrect the lake that died when they dug the quarry. A mandate that transferred to me along with the deed, the debt, and the legal obligation to make it right. But the next folder made my hands shake. Willowbrook Estates Development Application, 1,989 to 1,992 inches. The marketing brochures were pure poetry written in fraud ink. Full-color artist renditions showed families fishing from elegant docks, children splashing in crystal water, luxury homes overlooking Willowbrook's crown jewel, a pristine 22-acre recreational lake. Every sales contract included premium pricing for future lakefront access and exclusive water recreation privileges. The sales agent signature on 47 contracts, Bethany Cromwell, licensed real estate professional. She hadn't just known about the lake. She'd been selling it for 30 goddamn years. I could smell the scope of this thing now. Musty basement air thick with the stench of systematic deception. Bethany had collected commissions on lake access that existed only in legal requirement and artist imagination. She'd promised her neighbors paradise, knowing someday someone would be forced to deliver it. That someone was me, and she was trying to steal the very thing she'd been contracted to provide. The environmental study spelled out restoration requirements with scientific precision. Native fish species, water quality standards, shoreline vegetation, wildlife habitat development. Everything I'd spent 7 months building wasn't just permitted. It was court-mandated environmental compliance 35 years overdue. I wasn't destroying wetlands. I was finally creating them. The HOA meeting minutes told a story of calculated deception spanning decades. 1995, lakefront amenities proceeding on environmental schedule. 2003, water recreation facilities pending final approvals. 2010, lake access improvements in development phase. 2018, exclusive water rights secured for community benefit. 30 years of lies documented in their own meeting minutes promising access to amenities that existed only in legal mandate and marketing fantasy. But Harold's Planning Commission files contained the smoking gun that made everything clear. As a city official, he'd been receiving quarterly environmental compliance reports showing Thornton property in continuous violation. He knew the lake restoration was legally required. He knew his wife had been selling access to something that didn't exist. He knew that eventually, inevitably, someone would be legally obligated to make Bethany's 30-year promise come true. They'd been running a generational con game, selling lake dreams while praying the restoration requirement would stay buried in bureaucratic amnesia. Now I was holding their 30-year house of cards, and they were desperate to burn it down before the foundation collapsed and buried them in fraud charges. I gathered evidence that felt warm with possibility and walked into pre-dawn air that smelled like summer storm and overdue justice. Sarah's Memorial Lake wasn't just our dream. It was the legal reckoning that would expose 3 decades of systematic theft disguised as HOA management. Bethany had made one fatal miscalculation. She'd declared war on the man who was legally obligated to deliver exactly what she'd been promising to provide. Time to make her dreams come true, whether she wanted them or not. Rebecca Martinez's law office at dawn smelled like leather justice and espresso strong enough to wake the dead, exactly what we needed to resurrect 35 years of buried truth. Jesus Christ, Dale. She spread the 1987 documents across her mahogany table like evidence of war crimes. You're not defending property. You're enforcing a court mandate that's been collecting dust since Reagan was president. I'd called an emergency strategy session at 6 a.m., bringing 3 banker's boxes of evidence and a thermos of coffee that could strip paint. Rebecca had assembled what looked like environmental law's version of the Avengers. Dr. Patricia Weiss from State Environmental Services, her lab coat still smelling of pond water and scientific integrity. Marcus Sawyer from the county prosecutor's office, whose briefcase practically vibrated with suppressed prosecutorial excitement, and Professor Janet Kowalski, whose textbook on wetland fraud was apparently becoming required reading in federal courtrooms. Here's the beautiful irony, Rebecca continued, her finger tracing the original restoration mandate. Bethany's been selling lake access for 30 years, but Dale's the first person actually delivering what she promised. She's trying to stop the very thing she's contractually obligated to provide. Doctor, Weiss leaned forward, excitement crackling in her voice like electricity before a storm. The restoration requirement couldn't be clearer. Federal law mandates ecosystem restoration after quarry closure. Mr. Hutchinson isn't just permitted to build this lake, he's legally compelled to complete it. Anyone interfering is obstructing federal environmental law. But Professor Kowalski dropped the bombshell that made my coffee taste like victory. There's federal grant money specifically for this situation. The Clean Water Act includes reimbursement for private citizens completing overdue environmental compliance. You could recover 60 to 70% of your costs. The irony was poetry written in bureaucratic ink. Sarah's memorial could pay for itself while exposing decades of fraud. Rebecca outlined our legal strategy with surgical precision. A quiet title action would force courts to determine true property ownership. A legal guillotine that would sever Bethany's claims at the neck while exposing her fraud under oath. When someone claims property ownership based on fabricated documents, quiet title proceedings become perjury traps with federal penalties attached. I remembered something from my Air Force days. When enemy radar locks onto your aircraft, you don't run. You jam their frequency and turn their own weapons against them. Bethany had been using legal harassment as psychological warfare. Now we'd use legal discovery to expose every lie she'd told for 3 decades. We're flipping the script, Jessica said, arriving from environmental law school with research that smelled like fresh ink and righteous indignation. Her laptop displayed case studies showing restored wetlands increasing property values by 15 to 20%. Real economic benefits, not Bethany's imaginary disasters. She's been painting Dad as environmental terrorist, Jessica continued, but he's actually delivering the environmental amenities she's been selling since before I was born. Thursday brought coalition building that felt like assembling democracy from spare parts. The fishing club pledged weekend volunteer labor, their enthusiasm mixing with the smell of fresh lumber as we built educational platforms. Environmental groups offered scientific expertise and political muscle. Most crucially, 3 honest HOA board members, the ones Bethany hadn't corrupted yet, agreed to audit financial records showing decades of dues collected for amenities that existed only in marketing brochures. The high school environmental science class adopted our lake as their senior project, bringing teenage energy and social media savvy to support scientific truth over suburban politics. Their teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had been fighting environmental education budget cuts for years. Our restoration project became her living laboratory for demonstrating wetland ecology. But our secret weapon was environmental journalist Rachel Torres, whose investigation into HOA fraud had been simmering for months. My case became the match that lit her powder keg, a front-page exposé titled "The 30-Year Con: How Suburban HOAs Sell Dreams They Never Intend to Deliver." This isn't isolated fraud, Rachel explained over lunch, that tasted like hope and possibility. It's systematic exploitation spanning decades. Your case could trigger federal RICO investigation into HOA practices nationwide. We're talking organized crime disguised as community management. The story would break simultaneously with our legal filings, creating media firestorm that would make Bethany's fraud impossible to ignore, explain, or survive politically. Friday evening, I stood on my dock listening to loons call across water that reflected more than just sunset. It reflected the possibility of justice 35 years overdue. The smell of cedar mixed with clean lake air that carried whispers of Sarah's approval and something else: vindication. My phone buzzed with coalition updates. Veterans organizations offering solidarity, environmental groups pledging resources, honest neighbors apologizing for believing lies for so long, Channel 7 requesting exclusive access to document restoration benefits that would shame Bethany's fear-mongering into historical footnote. The army was assembled. The evidence was overwhelming. The legal strategy was bulletproof. Tomorrow we'd show Willowbrook what happened when truth finally got tired of being patient with lies. Sarah's memorial was about to become everyone's victory against 35 years of systematic theft disguised as community leadership. Bethany's desperation stank of pure malice when my 4 a.m. security alert showed Harold creeping around my excavator like a suburban terrorist armed with grocery store sugar and 30 years of entitlement. I watched the footage over coffee that had gone bitter with rage, Harold's whispered instructions crystal clear through my audio feed. Pour it in the fuel tank. Bethany said it'll destroy the engine. Make it look like equipment failure. Nobody proves sabotage. His hands shook as he dumped 5 pounds of granulated destruction into Big Jim's hydraulic system. The sound of cascading sugar like rain on a coffin lid. This wasn't just attacking my project. This was desecrating Sarah's memorial with the calculating viciousness of people who'd never lost anything that mattered. By sunrise, the excavator was convulsing like a dying animal, hydraulic fluid bleeding crimson across gravel while diesel smoke choked the morning air with the smell of murdered machinery. Big Jim's voice cracked when he delivered the diagnosis. Complete engine replacement, 12 grand, maybe 14 with parts delays. Insurance won't touch sabotage without criminal conviction, he continued, wiping oil-stained hands on coveralls that reeked of frustrated craftsmanship. Even with video proof, they'll claim insufficient evidence. You're fucked, Dale. Sorry. But Harold's amateur hour terrorism was just the opening act. Tuesday brought an OSHA inspector who looked like he'd been manufactured in a bureaucracy factory, complete with clipboard programming and predetermined violation settings. Thomas Morrison III, because apparently government corruption was a family business spanning multiple generations. Anonymous safety complaint, he announced, his voice carrying the nasal authority of someone who'd never operated anything more dangerous than a stapler. Reports of unsafe excavation practices near water hazards. I gestured toward my textbook perfect worksite. Gentle slopes, marked boundaries, safety equipment staged like a federal training manual. What hazards? This is wetland restoration, not nuclear reactor maintenance. He started writing violations anyway, his pen scratching like vultures on roadkill. Improper signage, inadequate fall protection, missing emergency contact posting. Each citation carried fines designed to bleed my restoration budget white, while lawyers argued semantics. I recognized his signature from county planning documents. Thomas Morrison III, son of suspended Inspector Kevin Morrison Jr., grandson of the original planning commissioner who'd approved Willowbrook's fraudulent development in 1987. 3 generations of Morrisons had been enabling Cromwell corruption, turning government service into family crime syndicate. They hadn't just infiltrated local government, they'd inherited it. Wednesday launched psychological warfare that made sabotage look gentle. Citizens for Environmental Protection materialized overnight, a AstroTurf organization consisting entirely of Bethany's yoga instructor, Harold's poker buddies, and people who'd probably never seen actual wildlife outside Disney movies. They established a protest camp at my access road, their chants about ecological terrorism echoing across the wetlands I was actually protecting. Professional signs, catered lunches, portable toilets. This wasn't grassroots activism, this was Broadway theater with the environmental protection theme. Stop destroying our wetlands, they screamed at the man restoring their wetlands. The irony was so toxic it could have poisoned the lake I was trying to heal. Local Channel 7 covered their performance art like legitimate news, interviewing concerned citizens about environmental destruction, while my actual environmental restoration continued 50 yards behind them. The smell of their catered sandwiches mixed with diesel exhaust from my replacement equipment, creating an olfactory metaphor for suburban hypocrisy. But Thursday brought harassment that made my hands shake with suppressed violence. Volunteers reported workplace intimidation, subtle threats about community standing, and business relationships delivered by Harold's network of municipal parasites. My contractor's permits got flagged for random additional review. The high school environmental club received formal complaints about inappropriate political activism that could torpedo their college applications. They were using suburban social pressure like chemical weapons, targeting everyone who dared support Sarah's memorial. Friday delivered their nuclear option wrapped in federal authority and signed by family corruption. Endangered species violation requiring immediate project shutdown. The wildlife official who arrived looked like she'd been cloned from the same bureaucrat factory that produced the Morrison dynasty, Janet Cromwell Morrison, Bethany's sister, Kevin Morrison Jr., Edaw's wife, regional wildlife compliance officer, whose credentials were probably as fabricated as her environmental concern. Reports of Indiana bat habitat destruction, she announced, unpacking equipment that cost more than most people's annual salary. Federal law mandates immediate cessation pending comprehensive endangered species assessment. The assessment would take 8 weeks. 8 weeks of shutdown during optimal restoration season. 8 weeks of mounting legal bills while Sarah's memorial turned back into stagnant swamp. 8 weeks for the Cromwell Morrison crime family to manufacture more crises using taxpayer-funded authority. I stood on my dock that evening, watching Janet document bat habitat in water that hadn't supported bats since the quarry opened 4 decades ago. The humid air carried the metallic taste of systematic corruption and something else, the bitter realization that they were using environmental law to prevent environmental restoration. They were making federal agencies complicit in destroying the very thing those agencies were supposed to protect, while desecrating my wife's memory with badges and bureaucracy. Tomorrow would bring their final assault on everything Sarah and I had dreamed about. But tonight, I was done playing defense against 35 years of organized crime disguised as community leadership. Monday's emergency city council notice arrived like a death warrant wrapped in municipal letterhead, the certified mail signature required feeling like signing my own execution order. Emergency public safety hearing, Hutchinson property violations, and community protection measures. The language made my lake restoration sound like I'd been building biological weapons instead of honoring my dead wife's memory. Bethany had orchestrated this political assassination with the precision of someone who'd spent 30 years infiltrating local government like a virus. City Attorney Michael Cromwell, her brother, naturally, would present evidence of my reckless endangerment to a council she'd been grooming since Clinton was president. The hearing agenda read like charges against a domestic terrorist: unauthorized environmental destruction, violation of community safety protocols, deliberate obstruction of municipal authority. My personal favorite was ongoing harassment of neighborhood residents through intimidation and psychological warfare. They were accusing me of terrorism while systematically destroying everything I'd built to honor Sarah's memory. Tuesday brought media warfare that made my morning coffee taste like liquid betrayal. Channel 7's investigative segment featured exclusive interviews with traumatized neighbors describing how my dangerous obsession with excavation had turned their peaceful community into a construction nightmare threatening children's safety. But the knife twist that nearly broke me came when they aired footage of Harold Cromwell, suddenly rebranded as local veteran and community leader, expressing grave concern about my mental stability following recent personal tragedy. "We understand grief," Harold said, his voice dripping with manufactured compassion. "But when someone's mourning process endangers an entire community, we have to intervene. Dale needs help, not enabling." I watched them weaponize Sarah's death on live television, transforming my love for her into evidence of dangerous mental illness while drinking from her chipped blue mug that now felt like holding broken glass. Channel 7's psychological expert was Dr. Patricia Weston, who'd apparently diagnosed my grief-induced environmental mania through television interviews. Her analysis sounded professional until Rebecca discovered that Patricia Weston was Patricia Cromwell, Bethany's daughter who'd purchased her psychology credentials online and been practicing unlicensed therapy while her mother destroyed people's lives with municipal politics. 3 generations of Cromwells had been destroying my community, and now they were using fake psychology to justify stealing Sarah's memorial. Wednesday escalated to political terrorism that made previous harassment look like gentle disagreement. Mayor Jennifer Collins announced emergency measures to protect community welfare from rogue development, while city council members parroted talking points that sounded suspiciously scripted. But the real violation was discovering they'd been planning my execution in closed-door sessions that violated every open meeting law on the books. Rebecca's investigation revealed weeks of illegal deliberations about eminent domain seizure, emergency municipal authority, and creative environmental interpretations that would justify confiscating my property. They weren't just trying to stop restoration. They were planning to steal Sarah's lake and rebrand it as municipal property under Bethany's political control. Thursday morning brought sabotage that made me understand what real hatred looked like. Someone with professional equipment had poisoned my entire restoration site with industrial herbicide, turning 7 months of native plant recovery into a chemical graveyard that reeked of systematic murder. The damage was surgical, every beneficial species killed while invasive weeds thrived, creating photogenic evidence of environmental destruction, perfectly timed for tomorrow's council hearing. The smell of dying vegetation mixed with chemical death created an olfactory crime scene that would have made Sarah weep blood. I knelt in the ruins of our dream, touching soil that had been intentionally poisoned to destroy everything we'd built together. The water that had been crystal clear now carried an oily sheen that reflected gathering storm clouds like tears on a funeral shroud. But Friday delivered the killing blow that revealed how deep their corruption reached. Environmental Protection Agency investigators arrived with federal authority to shut down my criminal environmental violations under emergency enforcement powers. Special Agent Jennifer Morrison Cromwell introduced herself with credentials that made my soul freeze. Not just another family member. This was the next generation of systematic corruption extending into federal law enforcement. Bethany's daughter-in-law, Kevin Morrison's sister, the family crime syndicate had metastasized into federal agencies. Mr. Hutchinson, you're under federal investigation for willful violation of environmental protection statutes, she announced, her badge gleaming like a weapon. This property is now under EPA jurisdiction pending criminal review. I stood in what used to be Sarah's memorial paradise, watching federal agents document environmental crimes that consisted entirely of restoring the environment they were supposedly protecting. The irony was so brutal it could have killed faith in justice itself. Tomorrow's city council meeting would be my public crucifixion, with Bethany playing high priestess while her family provided the nails to destroy everything Sarah and I had sacrificed to build. But as I watched EPA agents contaminate evidence while documenting contamination, one thought crystallized with diamond clarity. They'd shown me every family connection, every corrupted agency, every illegal conspiracy. Tomorrow I wouldn't just be defending my lake. I'd be exposing 35 years of organized crime disguised as public service. Time to show them what happens when you declare war on a man who's got nothing left to lose except his wife's memory and a federal prosecutor's phone number. City Hall reeked of floor wax and institutional corruption when I arrived at 6:30 p.m., carrying a single manila folder that contained 35 years of systematic fraud waiting to detonate like a legal nuclear bomb. The council chambers were packed beyond fire code capacity, Channel 7's news crew claiming prime position while Bethany's supporters filled the front rows like a jury she'd handpicked for my execution. The air conditioning struggled against summer humidity and the collective breath of people who'd come to watch democracy get murdered in real time. Bethany commanded the speaker's podium like a general addressing conquered territory, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who'd spent 3 decades turning public service into personal profit. She'd prepared a multimedia presentation that would have impressed war crimes tribunals, professional graphics documenting my environmental terrorism, and community endangerment through restoration work that had transformed poison into paradise. Citizens of Willowbrook, she began, clicking to a slide showing dead vegetation from yesterday's herbicide attack. We gather tonight to protect our children from a dangerous individual whose obsession has endangered our entire community. She presented fabricated evidence with theatrical precision, staged photos of environmental destruction, falsified expert reports, and testimony from concerned neighbors who'd been paid for their performances through lawn care discounts and municipal favors. The audience murmured approval while I sat quietly watching 35 years of lies reach their crescendo. But when Bethany clicked to her final slide, artist renditions of restored community safety featuring a municipal park where my memorial lake used to exist, something in my chest snapped like a breaking dam. "Your Honor," I said, standing without permission while Bethany's mouth fell open in mid-sentence. I request permission to present additional evidence that City Council should consider before making this decision. Mayor Collins looked confused, probably because her script hadn't included the possibility that I might actually defend myself. Mr. Hutchinson, this is a municipal safety hearing, not a trial. You'll have opportunity for comment during— I have evidence of federal crimes, I interrupted, my voice carrying across the silent chamber like a gunshot. Evidence that this entire hearing is based on fraudulent documents and systematic corruption spanning 3 decades. The room went dead silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the click of Channel 7's camera zooming in for the kill shot they hadn't expected. I opened my manila folder like I was opening Pandora's box, which in retrospect was exactly what I was doing. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, walking to the projector that Bethany had abandoned like a sinking ship, I want to show you what we're really dealing with tonight. The 1987 Environmental Impact Study appeared on screen in all its bureaucratic glory, the restoration mandate highlighted in yellow marker that glowed under fluorescent lights like evidence of divine justice. This document proves that lake restoration on my property isn't environmental destruction. It's federally mandated environmental compliance that's been ignored for 35 years. My voice stayed steady while my hands shook with suppressed rage. And Mrs. Cromwell has known about this mandate since 1989, when she began selling lake access to homeowners for premium prices. I clicked to the next slide. Bethany's original real estate marketing materials promising exclusive lakefront lifestyle to families who'd paid extra for amenities that existed only in legal requirement and artistic imagination. The audience's murmur shifted from supportive to confused as neighbors realized they'd been paying premium prices for phantom amenities their HOA president had known she couldn't deliver. But the real bombshell was slide 3. HOA financial records showing 3 decades of dues collected for lake access maintenance and waterfront amenity development that had funded everything except actual lake access or waterfront amenities. Mrs. Cromwell has been collecting money for lake access since Bush Sr. was president, I continued, watching Bethany's face cycle through confusion, anger, and pure panic. She's not trying to protect the environment. She's trying to prevent me from delivering the lake access she's been selling for 30 years. That's when County Prosecutor Marcus Sawyer stood up from the back row, his badge gleaming under fluorescent lights like a sword of justice finally unsheathed. Mrs. Cromwell, he announced, his voice carrying federal authority that made municipal politics look like children's games. You're under arrest for federal mail fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and violation of federal environmental protection statutes. The courtroom erupted like a dam bursting. Neighbors demanding refunds, reporters shouting questions, Bethany's supporters scrambling for exits while FBI agents appeared from nowhere to assist with what was apparently a coordinated federal bust. I walked to the podium Bethany had abandoned, tapped the microphone, and delivered the line I'd been rehearsing in my head for 7 months. Sarah's Memorial Lake will be completed as federally mandated environmental restoration, I said, my voice carrying across chaos like calm after a storm. And it will be dedicated as a public conservation area where families can enjoy the lake access they've been paying for since 1989. The applause started slowly, a few honest neighbors who'd supported me through months of harassment. Then it built like thunder rolling across Sarah's restored waters, drowning out Bethany's protests as federal agents led her away in handcuffs that clicked like justice finally arriving 35 years late. Channel 7 captured everything, the evidence, the arrests, the community's reaction to discovering they'd been defrauded by their own HOA president for 3 decades. Justice had arrived, and it smelled like fresh water and possibilities instead of corruption and broken promises. 6 months later, Sarah's Memorial Lake sparkled under October sunshine that carried the smell of victory and autumn leaves, reflecting a world where justice had finally learned to swim. The federal investigation had unraveled faster than Bethany's carefully constructed lies. FBI forensic accountants discovered she'd embezzled over $400,000 in HOA dues over 15 years, funding everything from her daughter's fake psychology degree to Harold's municipal bribery network. The conspiracy charges alone carried 20-year sentences, but the environmental crimes, interfering with federally mandated restoration, added another decade of federal prison time. Judge Manning had been removed from the bench after ethics investigations revealed her Willowbrook property purchase had been financed through Harold's Planning Commission bribes. The Morrison family's multi-generational corruption network collapsed like a house of cards built on quicksand, with federal prosecutors filing RICO charges that would keep them busy until their grandchildren graduated college. But the sweetest victory was walking across my dock every morning, breathing air that smelled like clean water and honest work instead of diesel fumes and systematic fraud. The lake had become everything Sarah dreamed and more. Crystal clear water hosted native fish populations that drew osprey, blue herons, and families who'd finally received the lake access they'd been paying for since Bush Sr. was president. The educational pavilion displayed before and after photos showing quarry restoration as environmental success story, complete with water quality data that made environmental engineers weep with professional joy. My phone buzzed with updates from Jessica, who'd graduated environmental law school and joined the state attorney general's office prosecuting HOA frauds statewide. My case had triggered federal investigation into 12 similar schemes, with prosecutions pending in 3 states and new federal legislation protecting homeowners from phantom amenity fraud. "Dad, you started something bigger than Sarah's Lake," she'd said during our last call. "You've given people hope that justice still works when good people fight back against corruption." The Sarah Dale Memorial Scholarship had awarded its first grants to 5 environmental engineering students who'd spend summers working restoration projects across 3 counties. The smell of fresh concrete mixed with lake water as volunteers finished the accessibility ramp that would let disabled veterans enjoy therapeutic fishing programs year-round. But the real magic was community transformation. Willowbrook Estates had dissolved its corrupt HOA and reformed as Willowbrook Conservation Community, with transparent leadership and environmental stewardship replacing political terrorism and systematic theft. Property values had increased 30%, not from promised amenities that didn't exist, but from actual amenities that enhanced everyone's quality of life. New neighbors stopped by weekly, thanking me for fighting battles they'd been too intimidated to fight themselves. The Johnsons from Maple Street brought homemade cookies every Sunday, apologizing for signing Bethany's petition before understanding what they were really supporting. Even Channel 7 had produced a documentary about grassroots justice defeating institutional corruption, with Sarah's story inspiring environmental restoration projects nationwide. The annual Willowbrook Conservation Festival would be held next weekend, featuring environmental education, family fishing, and native plant sales supporting other restoration projects. Local restaurants were donating food, environmental groups were providing educational displays, and 3 colleges were sending student researchers to study our restoration model. The festival would culminate with dedication of the Sarah Dale Memorial Conservation Area, 40 acres of restored wetlands that would remain protected habitat forever, managed by the State Environmental Agency with community volunteer support. Standing on my dock that evening, I raised Sarah's chipped blue mug toward sunset that painted the water gold and crimson, whispering words I'd wanted to say for months. "We did it, babe. We actually did it." The sound of loons calling across still water mixed with distant laughter from families enjoying the lake they'd finally received. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight was for remembering that sometimes, just sometimes, truth defeats lies, justice defeats corruption, and love defeats everything else. If you've got your own HOA horror story, share it in the comments below. Someone needs to document these neighborhood dictatorships before they steal someone else's dreams. And hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about ordinary people defeating extraordinary corruption, because this is just the beginning. Sarah's Lake had taught me something important. When you fight for what you love instead of against what you hate, you might just build something beautiful enough to last forever. The water reflected stars and possibilities, both infinite and worth fighting for.